Part 66. Yi Yang was framed like a rapist villain. Young master, the servants are leaving the palace, you have to take good care of yourself. And remember to cover the quilt before taking a nap in the afternoon. Xiao Doubting warned worriedly. I know, why don't you go out of the palace for a day? Is it necessary to make it look like parting? Yi Yang really took Xiao Doubting, so why not go out to the palace to visit relatives? Is it necessary to make it look like life and death? Young master. The slave is a little nervous today. The slave is afraid that the slave will leave, and the young master will be wronged. Xiao Doubting pouted and looked pitiful. To be truly wronged. As long as Jun Yi doesn't come to trouble him, he will never be wronged at all. Yi Yang stood up, patted Xiao Doubting on the shoulder, and comforted, don't worry. No one will be full of food and look for trouble for me. If it's not your young master, you can ask the emperor for a few servants. At least every servant will be on the day of the moon coming out of the palace. Someone will take care of your food and daily life. Xiao Doubting himself doesn't know what happened to himself today. Why is he worried about Yi Yang? I like to be clean, and I don't like others to be around me all day. Yi Yang is speechless. He is not the character to be bullied. How could he be wronged? As a self-reliant modern person, Yi Yang is used to doing everything by himself. If he hadn't known that Xiao Doubting would never betray him, he might not even need a servant. Should the servant go to Lu Kairan to borrow a servant to take care of the young master's daily life today? Xiao Doubting gave his suggestion. Yi Yang felt that Xiao Doubting talked too much today. So why don't you just go out to the palace? It made him seem like he would starve to death in the Jinyang palace, and finally being annoyed by Xiao Doubting. He pushed Xiao Doubting away from the Jinyang palace, and told him to hurry up and return. I know what you said. Hurry up. Come out and get some air. By the way, the money I give you must be handed over to my mother, and I advise my mother to eat, drink, and not save. Okay, the servant remembers. Xiao Doubting turned back one step at a time. The reluctant expression made it look like parting, making Yi Yang hairy all over his body. Yi Yang returned to the hall. He sat behind the desk, picked up the writing brush and started his life of coding. Because he was so bored recently, so bored to the point of counting beans, he picked up his writing dream and started his creative journey. Although the people of the dynasty he wrote about don't know it, it doesn't matter. Maybe one day the time is right, he can promote Chinese characters in this dynasty. Some people must be curious. Why did Yi Yang not use the characters of this dynasty to write a script? Yi Yang will definitely answer with a gloomy face. I think so too. But the system of the dynasty characters is not perfect at all, and many Chinese characters cannot be replaced by corresponding characters. In particular, the poems, songs, and idioms accumulated in China for 5,000 years, as well as many classical Chinese, common sayings, and proverbs, could not be expressed at all in this dynasty. So he chose Chinese characters to write. He was so engrossed in his writing that time passed before he knew it, and he didn't raise his head until someone called him. He looked at the unfamiliar eunuch in front of him with a puzzled look. Is something wrong? Young concubine Yi, the slave, is the eunuch in the imperial dining room. Yesterday, Xiao Doubting asked the slave to deliver lunch to master concubine Yi today. Yi Yang saw the eunuch, holding the food in his hand, so he smiled and said, thanks. Put the food on the table next to you. Yi Yang put down the brush, got up and walked to the table. The eunuch who delivered the meal to Yi Yang was handsome and shy. He put the food in the tray on the table and respectfully said, Master Yi, please have dinner. The slave is waiting outside. It's called a slave. And a slave is called Xiao Luji. Yi Yang nodded, indicating that he understood. He sat at the table, watching the sumptuous lunch, very appetizing. He picked up chopsticks and ate. He felt sleepy just eating and eating. His eyelids were too heavy to open. He shook his head and had some doubts in his heart, but the doubts did not last long. And the sudden drowsiness swept through the whole body. His head, bang, knocked on the table and fell asleep. Yi Yang woke up from all kinds of noises. He opened his heavy eyes, struggled to sit up, looked at the noisy crowd, and looked puzzled. What are you doing? What are you asking us for? Why didn't you ask what you were doing? Bai Jiyu, dressed in gorgeous clothes, stood in the middle of the house with an expression she couldn't bear to look directly at. And there were 4 eunuchs behind him. Although they all had their heads down, their expressions of trying to open their eyes and looking up proved that they had seen the scene on the bed. Me? The memory before falling asleep suddenly came, and a bad premonition hit him. He hurriedly turned his head, only to see that there was someone sleeping beside him. No, to be precise, a man. Take a closer look, isn't it Xiao Luji who brought him meals at noon? A cold air spread from the soles of the feet to the limbs, and the whole body was as cold as falling into an ice cellar. Especially the current himself, naked and being seen by so many people. What's more, he can't wash himself even if he jumps into the Yellow River. Only at this moment did he realize the horror of the harem. The real harem is not like the novels he wrote in that the male protagonist's harem is always so warm and harmonious. And Xiao Luji, who was originally sleeping beside him, was also awakened. He opened his eyes and saw so many people staring at him. He jumped up in shame and anger, and instantly revealed an inch of weight loss in his body. They saw that his body was covered with different shades of asterisk, which stimulated Bai Jiyu to widen her eyes suddenly, secretly scolding these people for being so ruthless that they were so realistic. If she hadn't known the truth, she would have wondered if Yi Yang did it. Xiao Luji was naked, jumped out of bed in grief and anger, slammed his head against a pillar beside him, and fainted. Damn Nima. Yi Yang looked at the little guy who hit the pillar and felt that even if he jumped into the clear sea, he couldn't wash it off. Your Majesty is here. Eunuch Yun's shrill and loud voice came from afar, causing Yi Yang to shudder with fright, and hurriedly picked up the clothes that had been thrown under the bed and put them on his body. Bai Jiyu looked at Yi Yang, who was wearing clothes in a hurry. A gloating flash of schadenfreude flashed in her eyes. She turned around in a good mood, walked out of Yi Yang's bedroom, and went to the front yard to meet the emperor. The eunuchs behind him glanced at Xiao Luji, who was unconscious, with a trace of pity in their eyes, and then hurriedly followed behind their master to greet the emperor. Yi Yang put on his clothes in a panic, glanced at Xiao Luji, who had passed out. His face was gloomy. He threw Xiao Luozi's clothes on Xiao Luji, covering his body that couldn't bear to look directly. He was just about to go out to meet the emperor, who Zhen Yi walked in angrily. My concubine pays respect to the emperor. Long live the emperor. Before Yi Yang finished speaking, Zhen Yi's cold voice came. Concubine Yi, can you explain it? Zhen Yi looked at Xiao Luji, who had passed out, with a gloomy expression on his face, as if dripping ink. In particular, Xiao Luozi's exposed skin was covered with different shades of asterisk, and his forehead was bulging with anger. These people are so bad, they dare to frame Yi Yang like this. Yes, right. When he heard that Yi Yang and the eunuch were doing dirty things, his first thought was that it was a conspiracy, because it was impossible for Yi Yang, who liked women, to touch men. Your Majesty, the concubine is wrong. Yi Yang shouted. Wrong. Yi Yang didn't believe that Zhen Yi, who was very witty, would not see it with such an obvious frame-up. However, when he glanced at Xiao Luji, who had passed out, and saw the different shades of asterisk on the other side, He felt that his words were so pale and powerless. Wronged? You've already caught the rape in bed, is this still wrong? Bai Jiyu didn't think it was a big deal, and made up for it ruthlessly. Get out! Zhun Yi suddenly roared, frightening Bai Jiyu, who was beside him. Bai Jiyu had never seen Zhun Yi, who had made such a big fire before. She was so scared that she turned pale and exited Yi Yang's room. After waiting for the only person he trusted most in the room, Zhun Yi sat on the stool beside him, looked at Xiao Luji, who had passed out, and said to Eunuch Yun behind him, "Wake him up." Here, Eunuch Yun instructs the two eunuchs and asks them to quickly fetch a basin of ice water. These two eunuchs are the most trusted eunuchs around Zhun Yi. The two hurriedly exited the room and went to the imperial kitchen to fetch ice water. While waiting for the ice water, several people in the room did not speak, and for a while, the air froze, and the depression was almost suffocating. Yi Yang, who was kneeling on the ground, was stared at by Zhun Yi and felt uncomfortable, as if Zhun Yi could stare into his flesh, making him feel uncomfortable and wanted to escape. He tightened his body, wishing that he could pass out like Xiao Luji. The door was pushed open, and the two eunuchs who fetched ice water hurried in. They poured the cold ice water on Xiao Luji, so frightened that Yi Yang hurriedly pinched away the stupid idea of pretending to be unconscious. And Xiao Luji, who passed out, was also awakened by the cold ice water. When he saw Zhun Yi with a gloomy expression, he was so frightened that he hurriedly knelt on the ground. And he didn't even know where his body was on the ground. Yi Yang couldn't see the sight of these hot eyes. He picked up a shirt and threw it to Xiao Luji with a look of disgust. Put the clothes on and look disgusting. There was undisguised disgust in his eyes, which made Zhun Yi even more sure Yi Yang doesn't like men. Turning to the thought that he was also a man, his heart stings slightly. But it is obviously not the time to care about these, but how to rescue Yi Yang. This matter will definitely spread throughout the entire palace within a day. By that time, the ministers in the court who have long disliked Yi Yang will definitely take the opportunity to impeach Yi Yang. Even if he had the intention to protect Yi Yang, Yi Yang could not escape this crisis. In his heart, he cursed Yi Yang for daring to eat the food that anyone sent him. Look, he killed himself. He had persuaded Yi Yang before that he was looking for a few servants to serve him, but Yi Yang refused his kindness with the slogan of, "I like cleanliness." The more he thinks about it now, the more angry he is. He shouldn't have listened to Yi Yang at that time, at least he won't appear in this play. Xiao Luji was so frightened that he didn't dare to wear the clothes Yi Yang threw over. "I told you to put on your clothes and put them on. What does it look like when you're so naked?" Zhun Yi also felt extremely dazzling when he saw the asterisk on Xiao Luozi's body, so he asked him to put on his clothes first. "Yes, Your Majesty." Xiao Luji picked up his clothes, regardless of whether the clothes were wet or not. He hurriedly put them on his body, and then knelt on the ground, waiting for the emperor's judgment. "Xiao Luji, honestly speaking, who sent you to frame concubine Yi?" Zhun Yi's low voice was mixed with a sense of oppression, which made Xiao Luozi's heart tremble. The limbs on the ground were even weaker, almost unable to support his body. He resisted the fear in his heart, and whispered back with a trembling voice, "It was concubine Yi who forced the servant. The servant resisted with all my might, but my strength was not as strong as Yi Yang's strength, so I was given by Yi Yang." At the end, Xiao Luji brought a cry, "It sounds very pitiful. You are such a fart, how could this lord touch you? Damn, has your conscience been eaten by a dog? Wouldn't your conscience hurt if you framed this lord like this?" Yi Yang was in a hurry. His mouth was full of fragrance, and he scolded Xiao Luji for being stupid. Xiao Luji didn't understand Yi Yang's swearing words at all. He trembled and cried, "Your Majesty. It's really a slave forced by young master concubine Yi." After that, he stood up and rammed towards the pillar again. Jun Yi knew that when Xiao Luji died, he really had no proof for Yi Yang. So, he stood up, rushed to grab Xiao Luji, who wanted to commit suicide, and threw him to eunuch Yun, who was following him. Coldly said, "Take good care of him. He must never be allowed to die." Here, eunuch Yun pressed Xiao Luji, who was struggling violently, to the ground. Seeing that he was about to bite his tongue and commit suicide, he put his hand on Xiao Luozi's chin, squeezed it hard, and forced Xiao Luozi's chin to the ground like dislocated. Yi Yang saw that his scalp was numb, and he felt the pain of his jaw twitching. Damn! Looking at eunuch Yun's kind-hearted look on weekdays, I thought eunuch Yun was kind-hearted, but now I know that when eunuch Yun is ruthless, it will be creepy. Jun Yi looked down at Xiao Luji from a high place, and said coldly and ruthlessly, "I will ask you one last time. Who sent you to frame concubine Yi?" Xiao Luji never thought that the emperor would trust Yi Yang so much. The emperor still trusts Yi Yang so much. Thinking of his family being threatened, he has no choice but to insist that it was Yi Yang who forced him. With tears in his eyes, he cried out, "Your Majesty, it's really young master concubine Yi who forced the servants. Your Majesty, please believe in the servants." Because of the dislocated jaw, Xiao Luozi's voice was indistinct, but they knew what he said. Seeing that Xiao Luji didn't shed tears when he didn't see the coffin, Jun Yi snorted coldly and said to eunuch Yun, "Lock him up and torture him for questioning. Before asking who is the real murderer, he is not allowed to die." Xiao Luji is trembling like a sieve, wanting to beg for mercy, but looking at Jun Yi's cold eyes without any emotion, he was so scared that he forgot to beg for mercy. Here, eunuch Yun responded respectfully, picked up Xiao Luji like a chicken, and walked out the door. Yi Yang, who was kneeling on the ground, was also a little uneasy when he heard the torture and questioning. If the emperor didn't believe him, would he also torture him? Thinking of the various tortures that violated human nature in this dynasty, my scalp goes numb.